Well, it is joyful to be with you. No laughing. It's joyful to be with you this morning. I'm continuing in our series called Foundations, and thank you. Uh, yeah, Chris is excited about this, and I'm. Do you know? I'm more excited. I've just had a donut, so I'm waiting for the sugar hit. You know, you're like, I'm suddenly going to get halfway through. You're going to be like, wow, he's got some energy. That's the donut. But so back to this idea of foundations. This is just a word that we feel like the Lord's asked us to stand on in this next season. And foundations, as you are well aware, will determine the size and stability of a building. They enable it to flourish, but sometimes you've got to pay attention to your foundations. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Our foundations need to be secure. Now, Alice spoke last week, and I'm just going to bring up, hopefully, the church values will just come up. So Alice spoke about we are captivated and compelled by Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, and built on the word to be. A grace-filled community, kingdom carriers, shameless worshippers, courageously compassionate, and outrageously generous. And so I'm just picking that up today by looking at being a grace-filled community. Now, Acts 2, 42 to 47 is probably like one of those foundational passages in the Bible. If you've been a Christian any length of time, you will have heard this passage. And in fact, in my other role, I help train and develop church planters. And often they will talk about their vision for church planting. If it doesn't have this in it somewhere, suddenly you're like, I don't really know what you're trying to create. I mean, it's great, but it's not a church. And so foundationally, this is so important. They devoted them, verse 42 says this, they devote themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And that's really this idea of grace-filled community. Now, the New Testament word for community is a word called koinonia. And it's often translated by the slightly anemic word fellowship. I don't know how you feel about that word. Would you like to do fellowship together? I'm like, no, I really don't. I'm sorry. I'm out. That's how it makes me feel. But if I was to put it in this, when we put the word fellowship in the sentence, the fellowship of the ring, suddenly you're like, I'm back in. Isn't that interesting? Samwise Gamgee. But koinonia is linked to the words common, sharing, participation. And as Christians, we're a community of the Holy Spirit. I love that. We're a community of the Holy Spirit. We share our lives. It talks about sharing our property, sharing in the Gospels, and sharing in the sufferings and Christ's glory. So all of those things that we're called to share in. And in my mind, that is a picture of what deep community looks like. Our small group's tagline is committed to community. Deep communities formed when we live our lives with others, that we journey together, we fight for one another, we grieve together, we celebrate together. And there's a guy called Dietrich Bonhoeffer who I mention sometimes, but he's written a very famous book called Life Together, and it really talks about Christian community. And I love this quote, and as you said it says this, the person who loves their dream of community will destroy community. Ooh. But the person who loves those around them will create community. So if we think about it, I think the world has a picture of community, don't they, of this is what community looks like. But ultimately, that's what it looks like. And when I was praying just for the talk today, I felt like the Lord gave me this phrase, community builders, is that I felt like the Lord wanted to give the invitation to the room that actually it's too much for Rach and Dave lead this site, I lead the church. It's like it's too big a job actually for the pastors just to be the builders of the community. It has to go so much wider than that. And I think often there is that expectation that they build the community. What we've tried to set up is a way that through Sundays and small groups, you have a basics of foundational community and how it holds together. But underlyingly, that's just the starting point of what community looks like. But I think that it comes when everybody feels the responsibility rather than it's, well, 7 people build the community here. It's like, wow, it's never really going to be that awesome. When everybody feels the responsibility of building community, that's when it begins to shift. Because it's on all of us. And I think that's the mandate that the Lord gives us. You've got 2 requirements, and it's quite a low bar. I'm going to put it out there. You love God and you love people. And the community's built, isn't it, when people go, hey, do you want to come for lunch afterwards? Or do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Like, people throw out the invitation all of the time. People are desperate for deep Christian community, but sometimes when there is no commitment to it, you're going to talk about it, but you're not going to live in it. Tim Chester, who wrote a book called Total Church, he says it, I think this is really challenging. So maybe it's just challenging for me, but I'm going to put it into the room and see whether you find it challenging. The prevailing view of life today is that of an individual standing on his or her own, heroically juggling various responsibilities. Family, friendships, career, leisure, chores, decisions, money. We could also add social responsibilities like political activity, campaigning organizations, school associations. And from time to time, the pressures overwhelm us and we drop one or more of the balls. Do you know what I mean? So it's like this kind of juggling act, like we're just doing this all of the time and we're waiting to fail at some point. And that's what it can feel like in our society. All too often, church becomes one of them. We juggle our responsibilities for church just as we juggle our responsibilities for work and leisure. An alternative model is to view our various activities and responsibilities as spokes of a wheel. At the center or hub of life is not me as an individual, but us as members of the Christian community. Church is not another ball for me to juggle, but that which defines who I am and gives Christ-like shape to my life. That's quite a challenge, isn't it? So it's really just talking about the difference between, everything has kind of equal value and we go around and we scattergun and we're just like, and I think what Acts is teaching us is like, bang, this is foundational. And out of that comes your life. Out of Christian community comes your life. Well, I think in the West, we really struggle with that idea because fundamentally we think of ourselves in individual terms. As an individual, it's like I define myself, it's me, it's who I am, rather than can we actually be defined as bigger than that as the people of God? The picture that we're given in Acts is that they sacrificed one another, they shared their money and their life, and they lived their lives for God's glory, his greatness. And I'm like, that is the picture of community that I want to be a part of. Now, when we talk about our values, I'm just really aware that they are visionary values. Like, when I talk about grace-filled community, the truth is, it's like, we're a work in progress. We're all a work in progress, aren't we? It's not like, yeah, ding, we nailed it. We haven't nailed it. But we come back to being like, a grace-filled community is who we want to be as the people of God. And what's it going to take to build that? Let's be honest from the outset that being in community can be hard work, can't it? Oh, I put that in the room. Community life can be complicated. One of the most beautiful things about the church is that we get to do it together. One of the hardest things about the church is that we have to do it together. That church is a family, and that means we don't always get to choose who we do it with. And the truth is, we're all so different, aren't we? Different backgrounds. We've got our flaws. We've got our baggage. We've got our stuff. We've got our mess that we're bringing in. Some of me, I've got my own weirdness. Do you know what I mean? The more I go on in life, I'm like, I used to think I was really normal. The rest of you never thought I was normal. But I really thought I was pretty normal. The more I've gone on, I'm like, I'm just a little bit weird. And actually, my kids love to point that out to me as I walk past something and tap it. They're like, that's so weird, Dad. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry. We don't always get along with everybody all the time, do we? But God has called his church and his people to be real, authentic community. So what do the characteristics of a community that's pursuing Jesus look like? How does this work? And I'm just going to read out of Colossians 3, which I think is such a profoundly challenging passage, but really beautiful. And I'm going to be particularly in verses 11 to 17. But I want to read the whole passage because you just don't get the feel of it without it in context. And I think that's really important. So it says this. Colossians 3, verse 1. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things above, not on earthly things. How much of our time do we spend on earthly things? And he's like, no, I've called you to live out of heaven, looking down at earth rather than earth looking at heaven. I've made you differently. The message says this: so if you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, act like it. Okay. For you're died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's holy people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all of these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to the Father, God the Father through him. Sometimes Scripture just speaks for itself, doesn't it? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, sometimes we unpack it and I'm like, I don't know how one can read that without being challenged. Paul's got a lot to say about how the Colossians are to treat one another. And the first thing I just want to unpack is just this idea of clothing yourselves with grace. An image that runs throughout this whole passage is one of clothing, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like the old clothing. It's like you used to wear this, and now I'm giving you new clothes. I'm asking you to live differently, act differently. It should feel differently. This is what you were like. This is your old nature. This is your new nature. This is the earthly nature. This is the heavenly nature. So it's kind of just contrasting these things all the way through. And then that long list in verse 7 of deceit, malice, rage, all of these things. And it's like, I don't want you to live with that anymore. And then that other list of kindness, gentle, it's like, oh, wow, that's how therefore as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, we're now God's people. I'm not just James. My identity is bigger. I'm part of his family. And I think sometimes we underestimate that, don't we? When we're like, yeah, I'm kind of part of the people of God. It's like, no, it's your kingdom identity. That's who you are. And therefore, how you relate to God's people is really important. That's your family. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It's quite a list, isn't it? Do you go through and you're like, tick, fail? No, but it's like, I'm just looking at this week. I'm not done so well. I give myself a 2.5 out of 10. But the point that he's making, all of these qualities come from God's grace. So when we're a grace-filled community, it has to come from a place of grace. It has to come from an understanding of all that we've been forgiven in Jesus. Because we then don't come with any pride or any arrogance. We don't look down on other people thinking that we're better than them. We're like, I have been rescued and saved by the Lord. I have nothing. He has everything. He confers on me sonship and daughtership. That's what he puts on me. That's not an arrogance thing. I am no better than anybody else. I've just been given gift of life. So then when we come into community like that, understanding grace, well, then I'm a completely different person because I don't think that I'm better than anybody else. I have no pride. And then he's talking about this and he's like, I want you to walk with humility. Think And really, humility in the Christian life is just thinking about ourselves less. People are like, oh, how do I do that? I'm like, just think about yourself less. That's what humility. I will think about other people more than I think about myself. We have been trained to think about number one, numero uno first. That is the message of culture. Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Okay, this is so countercultural. Think about others. Love well. Love other people well. So kingdom foundation is love other people well. Love God, love other people well. Foundationally different, isn't it? And realize that you're part of a family, that you're not an individual, that you've been put in community. Now that's, again, that's not easy to be put in community. It's a gift, but it's not always easy. Grace-filled people create grace-filled communities. Grace-filled people create grace-filled communities. I love Ephesians 2:4-7. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions, even when we messed up, even when we were in our sin. It is by grace that you've been saved. We should never, ever, ever get beyond this. That's it. It's like grace. Foundational building block for community. It's a command, clothe yourselves, walk in it, live it out. These are the characteristics you think people should see in a community in ours: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Is that what they see in our life? Are those some of the characteristics that they'd mention? There is something deeply transformational about being in community. It's here that we get to work out our stuff, our flaws, our weaknesses. Nothing like other people to highlight how selfish we are, how little patience we have, how judgmental we are. And it's part of the discipling experience being in community. That's why we're called not to do it alone. There are some character transformations, some wardrobe changes that only happen when we share our life with others. And so what I think we see in the scriptures, what I see, is this phrase, deep community. In our culture, people want and are desperately after community. But I just think if the bedrock isn't Jesus, that's our difference, isn't it? The bedrock is him, and that everything else falls around that, and we do it because of him. It's different. Clothe yourselves with grace. Then moving into verse 11, it says this: here there's no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. I believe that God's community is meant to be really diverse in its nature. When you get to heaven, I don't know about how you picture it, but I picture worshipping with the multitudes. And in those multitudes are people from every language and every nation and every age. It's multi-ethnic. It's multi-age. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing a 3-year-old worship next to a 93-year-old. There is something deeply transformational in that experience. I remember when I was a 22-year-old, I led a small group with a guy in his 50s and another girl who's mid-20s actually. That was so foundational for me, his mentorship / fathership of me within that role. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I'm too young to do this. And he was like, no, I'll lead you through this. I'll take you on the journey. And we've been friends for years. I still see him sometimes. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've walked for 25 years. I get a birthday card from his wife every year. Amazing. But it changed me because I'm a 22-year-old. I don't know how to do, I thought I knew how to do life. And there's an arrogance, isn't there, in the younger generation, which is beautiful, actually. So as an older person looking at a younger person, I think we can take their zeal for life sometimes and just be really affected. And there's just this passion that actually as older people we need. We need that, and to see that in the younger people, to believe in that, to be a part of that. It's like, yes, I used to be like this. I'm remembering what I used to be like. I've forgotten. I got old. I got cynical. The danger. I got old and I got cynical. And I kind of, yeah, I've tried that before. Mentality. So the younger generation give us energy, whereas as the older generation, hopefully we give wisdom. We understand what it means to grieve. We understand what loss looks like. We understand that life's not simple. We understand that we've probably fallen out with people in our life at some point along the way. Do you know what I mean? There is just this rich experience, and therefore cross generations are so important. It's interesting talking with our younger community. They're desperate to be alongside older people. Do you know what I mean? There's this real, how do we become a part of that? Because they have quite a beautiful community, but it's very the same age. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's all one. And they're like, oh, we want mothers and fathers. It's like, well, that's a challenge, isn't it, to our church of how do we mother and father the younger generation? So I guess what I'm saying is heaven is going to be diverse. Our community is meant to be diverse. It's just meant to be a reflection of our city, you know, all the way through. Everybody's welcome. Isn't that a beautiful thing that anybody can come into your community? Everybody's welcome, no exclusions. And I think that's just what it's saying. And then we look through into verse 13. This is challenging. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Okay, let's give you a bit more Bonhoeffer, because this is awesome. A Christian fellowship lives and exists by the intercession of its members for one another, or it collapses. I can no longer condemn or hate a brother for whom I pray, no matter how much trouble he causes me. His faith, that hitherto may have been strange and intolerable to me, is transformed in intercession into the countenance of a brother for whom Christ died in the face of a forgiven sinner. I think it's what it's saying is fundamentally, if we do not pray for the other people, then we cannot live with the grace of God. So people will annoy us, people will frustrate us, people will let us down, people will hurt us. That's part of community. So it's not what we want from community. That's just the reality of living closely with one another. But there is a right way to respond. Don't you find that picture? A Christian fellowship lives and exists by the intercession of its members for one another, or it collapses. It has to pray for one another. That's what it looks like to prefer one another, to fight for one another, to be there for one another, to take. This is humility. I was thinking about you this week, and I felt like the Lord said this. As I said at the start, we don't get to choose who's in our family, and we won't necessarily all get on with each other all the time. There will be, unfortunately, moments when we let each other down and hurt one another. Back when we wrote these descriptions, we gave kind of a little tagline to Grace-Filled Community, because we're like, on one hand, it's self-explanatory, but what do we really mean by it? We wrote this. The grace and forgiveness that God shows us means that we welcome anyone, forgive quickly, and love extravagantly. We have an expression amongst our team, which is get ugly early. Do you know what I mean? Don't let things rumble on. Have the conflict healthily and then move on. Don't let things fester. Don't just cut people out of your life. Don't badmouth them to everybody else. Don't pretend it wasn't a big deal when it was, but choose to forgive. Martin Luther King says this: forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a permanent attitude. It's challenging, isn't it? Like, I'm challenged by it when I'm like, oh, yes. You know, I've been leading this community for 15 years now. And during that time, you pick up your war wounds. Do you know what I mean? Like, because community is not always easy. But I always want it to be real. That was always a desire of mine, that it was full of grace, that it was real, and that we admit that we do not get everything right. But at the heart of it, this is what we're aiming for. This is what we'd love to be. We want to be more like this. We want to model this more. Tim Keller says this: the more you rejoice in your own forgiveness, the quicker you will be to forgive others. So just as a quick question to you, how are you doing with this? Do you know what I mean? In your own life, is learning to be on that journey of forgiveness something that the Lord's just prodding you about right now? In the Bible, it says, you know, if you have something against a brother, raka, then actually it's important that we go and speak to that person in order that we don't hold that forever. All of this is a challenge. All of this is a choice, and none of it's necessarily easy. I've been in a church for a long time now, and I've observed there are different levels to which people choose to get involved in community. And I think that there's a dangerous place that some people get caught in when they're coming along, but they're not quite willing to commit. So it's almost like you see something, but yet you're not a part of it. And it's quite a painful place to be in, where you're like, oh, all of this is going on, but I'm not welcome. And you almost feel like an outsider looking on. And I can tell you when I know that when I talk to people, because they talk about the church as this outside entity. They would say, your church. And I'm like, our church. Do you know what I mean? It's like when somebody talks like an outsider, that's what it feels like. And so sometimes what we have to do is we have to take that next step in. When I meet with people, and there's just always stuff going on in people's lives, aren't there? Because it's life. But when they are not in a group of other people, then suddenly that's when most of the pastoral stuff comes out. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't feel a part of this. And it's like, yeah, but are you part of community? Well, no, I'm not part of a community. Well, I'm like, then that's hard. And so it's just this encouragement that I'm not even saying that your small group will be deeply easy. I don't even think that's the highest goal of what it's meant to be. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it's necessarily meant to be everybody's just like me and we agree about everything. I think that's the picture of the Christian community, is that maybe you're there because the Lord's wanting to knock some things off you. Do you know what I mean? And he's wanting to teach you how to forgive somebody and how to put up with somebody and how to be in community and how to be cross-gender. All of those things. I think sometimes, again, in the West, that our greatest desire is comfort. It's like for things to be easy. And sometimes like the Lord's like, no, I'm shaping you, I'm forming you, I'm discipling you. And it's only in deep community that we can be really formed like that. Otherwise, what happens is we step outside, we isolate ourselves, and we kind of treat ourselves as our own God. Whereas it's like, no, you're meant to be formed in this people. So isn't that a picture? And so we come from a point of, what did the scriptures say? The scriptures say this is how we're to live. And this is how we're to learn to share and to move on. Some people have been ridiculously generous to me over my time in churches. Do you know what I mean? Not like when I was younger, I was really struggling. Me and Jen were really struggling financially. And we were given a couple of cars. Do you know what I mean? People were just like, hey, have my car. One of them, I got given the car and I couldn't afford the insurance. So somebody was like, let me buy your insurance as well for a year. I'm like, what? That's a picture of what it means to share, though, isn't it? So when it's talking about this, somebody's like, and there will be people here who've got more. It's like, well, what is it that your generosity enables other people to thrive? Do you know what I mean? And there will be some of you that need more. So it's that give and take of community. That's the picture for me. Deep community is the invitation that we're given. And what I'm saying today is that all of us create that. That cannot just be Rach and Dave. That's too much for anybody to do. It's like, this is the community. How can you build community? If you love God and you love people, then we just build it and we do it. And we say, Jesus, who are you asking me to invest in? Where are you asking me to put my life? How can I be this? And really what a community needs to function or to thrive is it needs people that are foundation points throughout it. Do you know what I mean? They're like pillars of a community. That's how it happens. And that other people get to thrive around their stability and their ability to bring other people together. And so bang, like if this community is to grow and thrive, it needs foundations. It's like bang, 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 bang. And it's not rocket science stuff. It's like actually it's turning up. Who is the greatest member of a small group? The person that turns up week in, week out. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I'm really sorry. Sorry. And this is not to underplay anything. Can we just say we all lead busy lives? Let's just put that as a starting point. Like, we all lead busy lives. But the person that you're like, oh, they're there. Do you know what I mean? They turned up. And then that's how suddenly the person that turns up every 8 weeks, it's like, well, actually, how much can you feel a part of something if there's not that commitment to it? So that's where roots are formed. C.S. Lewis said this, and again, to love at all is to be vulnerable. When we put ourselves in these places, there is a vulnerability. But I deeply believe that Jesus meets us in that vulnerability. And he's like, you are the kind of person that I can build on because you're willing to be vulnerable. It's not easy, but it's beautiful. God's community is deep. And then Paul gives us the final piece of the puzzle in verse 14. He says, and over all of these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Again, he's using this clothing imagery, and it's like a big coat that you put on over the whole thing. At its very core, love is about sacrifice. God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. It's about preferring others. The Message Bible says, be content with second place when it's translating this passage. Prefer one another and be content to be second. It's like, ooh, okay. So as I come into land, I feel like there's just an invitation on this community to build well, to build deeply, to be deep community. For some of you, that's to re-engage. Maybe you're like, actually, do you know what? There has been some stuff that's hurt me. And it's like, okay, I completely hear that. There will be that stuff. But what is it to begin to be like, Lord, how do I process this? And how do I move forwards with this? I don't want to get stuck as an isolated individual. My heart has been hurt. It's like, okay, yeah, absolutely. And the Lord loves to come into those places with us. And he's like, yes, but I'm still here and I will help you and I will move things on. And for others of you, it's like, actually, you know that that's what God's given you. It's a gift. And so it's just like, just step into it. So let me pray just in finishing.